At number 10 we have The Faceless Man. This one was written by a young mother whose son would talk about a creepy man he would always see in his grandparents' bedroom. That sounds completely safe and normal, just a guy that nobody knows about hanging around in a bedroom. It sounds like he has the best intentions. Well, the little boy said even though the man was creepy, he would talk to him and he seemed like a nice guy, but he made the boy feel uncomfortable. Now the mom knew that this couldn't be a real person, but the more and more that the little boy talked about it, the more the mother's concern grew. It seemed that every time he went to visit his grandparents, he would have an encounter with this creepy man. Eventually, the mom asked what he looked like, and the little boy said, "Oh, he doesn't have a face." That will make it easy to sleep at night. A faceless demon that is making pals with your toddler. One of the toughest parts about being a parent is controlling the people your kids are exposed to, especially when they come from an alternate demonic universe. At number 9 we have Michael. So one of the best places to make friends is on vacation. You run into some other people who are on vacation, everyone feels loose and wild, you've got no responsibilities, maybe you all have too much to drink and everyone keeps a secret. Great times and never-ending memories. Well, sometimes you meet a bunch of like-minded people ready to make mistakes, and sometimes you're a little girl and you meet an invisible boy on the beach named Michael. The Reddit user I'm Not a Crazy Person wrote a story about a boy that no one could see that she met while she was on a trip with her parents in Florida. They were all on the beach and she spent the day playing with someone named Michael. When it was time to leave, she asked if Michael could come home with them. Her mom thought it was all just in her little girl's head, so she said yes. For years she said she could play with Michael and remember it all so vividly. It was until one day that Michael said he found his family and he was going home. Was this all in the little girl's head, or was there a ghost freeloading off them for years? At number 7 we have Grateful. A young girl by the name of Ruby was interviewed for a magazine. The article was about imaginary friends. Ruby described her imaginary friend as a 14-year-old girl named Grateful who was pregnant with 2 kids and had yellow eyelashes which let her see in the dark. It seemed like a fun character until the article was published, and then an actress by the name of Natalie Morales contacted the girl's mother through Twitter, giving her details on why this wasn't an imaginary friend but a ghost of a pregnant who was murdered. Ooh. At number 6 we have Girl in the Closet. Next we got what is for sure the creepiest one on the list so far. This story comes from a mom whose daughter would talk about a girl named Kelly who lived in her closet. Kelly would do pretty normal stuff. They would play together, Kelly would sometimes hang on a rocking chair, which is a huge ghost red flag, just saying. It was all nice and normal until one day the mom was watching the Amityville Horror starring Canadian treasure Ryan Reynolds, and her daughter walked into the room. It was during a scene where there was a girl on the screen with black pits for eyes and rotting skin. Her daughter then says that looks like Kelly, which her mom responds with, "Who's Kelly?" And her daughter replies, "Oh, Kelly's the girl who's living in my closet." I bet her mom had a great sleep that night. At number 5 we have A Family Spirit. We've got another one that we snagged right off of Reddit. Reddit is such a wonderful place. You can get everything you want. You can find illegal streaming websites, buy or sell used underwear, and even find terrifying stories about kids with demonic imaginary friends. This story was written by rcoley32. She said her daughter told her this story about a tall man who would visit her at night. This tall man would do the sign of the cross on her forehead. If it wasn't bad enough that ghosts are coming into your home, now they're touching you, then the creepy factor got turned all the way up to 11 when her and her daughter were going through some family photos. They came across a picture of R. Crowley's late grandfather, and the little girl said that is the man that has been visiting her at night. This is where it gets good. The little girl had never met her great grandfather before, and this was the first time she'd ever seen a picture of him. And when the dude was still alive, he would do the sign of the cross on all his kids' foreheads before they went to sleep. So I guess it's a little better knowing that the ghost who's coming into your house is a family member, but I don't really know. I don't know where everyone's lines are on this. At number 4 we have A Family Man. This one might be a real imaginary friend or demonic ghost murderer. The story comes from a sister of a little boy named Jordan, and Jordan had an imaginary friend named Roger. Roger was a family man with 9 kids, and Jordan and Roger got on fabulously, until one day when the little boy announced that Roger has gone and killed his whole family. Well, that's a very abrupt ending to a friendship. Well, this might have just all been the kid's head who didn't really understand the weight of death and murdering your 9. Or was it the ghost of a crazed man who is left behind from the murder he committed? Either way, if I have kids, I'm gonna get a tablet into their hands as fast as possible. There is no way in hell there's a ghost out there that is more entertaining than the whole internet. I don't care if you killed 10 kids, You're not beating Netflix or Russian dashcam videos. No, my kid's not gonna talk to you. Sticking on the tablet. At number 3 we have Jenny. Okay, so this one literally gave me goosebumps. This story is about a single mom and her daughter who have just moved into a new home. Not long after they settled in, the little girl started playing with an imaginary friend named Jenny. The kid's in a new place with just her and her mom, so it seemed pretty normal. One day, the unseen friend named Jenny asked the little girl if she could ask her mom if the cat could play in the basement. Her mom said yes. Why wouldn't she? This seems like a very simple request. Then the cat went missing. They couldn't find the little kitty anywhere. A couple days after the cat went missing, the little girl told her mom that Jenny wanted to play with her in the basement. The mom was really freaked out and of course said no. The next day, the little girl woke up with scratches all over her body. What the hell was going on? They did some research into what was going on in this home, and Jenny was a girl who went missing in the basement a long time ago and no one ever found her. This was spooky as hell, so the two quickly moved out, and I'm assuming they put the house on the market for a low price. At number 2 we have the Bunny Man. Taking care of kids can be so much fun, or you could be taking care of kids that think there's a demon that looks like the Easter Bunny living in their home. This story comes from a girl who says when she was 16 she would babysit 2 twins who were terrified by a thing they called the Bunny Man. On more than one occasion, one of the twins would start screaming, claiming that the Bunny Man was in the room with him. Sometimes the other twin could sense that his brother was in trouble and tell the babysitter to go help. Now this might have just been a prank to scare the crap out of a 16-year-old who's just trying to make a little bit of money, but she said that when they claimed they would see him, they would be terrified. Sometimes they would even be crying. So what do you think this is? Great actors ready to go into their Oscar role? Or is this the real life Donnie Darko? At number 1, we have Mr. Man. Okay, and last on our list is the story of Mr. Man. You may have heard of this one. It was a pretty famous story on Reddit. It comes from a guy who said when he was 5 years old he would be visited by a figure a few times a week. This would always happen when he would go to bed. He would see a tall man dressed in all black. He was bald and had a frowning face. He was probably frowning because he found out that he has to be bald in his entire afterlife. You stay bald when you're dead? That's a huge bummer. This figure would never hurt him, but it would just kind of float above his bed like a really creepy roommate. Then one day it just vanished and never came back. It wasn't until years later, when he was all grown up, that Mr. Man made his return. He saw the shadowy figure looking at him through a doorway, and then it used its ghostly powers to swing the door shut. At number 10 we have Angel. A demon naming itself Angel. Seems like a plan so dumb it might work. That's like going into a bank with a and being like, oh, I'm the vault inspector. Nothing to see here. Just came to look at the vault and I'll be on my way. Why do you have that big bag with the dollar sign on it? Oh, no reason. That's just my bag I carry all my toys in to give to the kids at the hospital. Nothing to worry about. This one was thrown on Reddit by Redditor Sword Rallier. He wrote about when he was a kid and he had no friends, which is a very huge bummer to start this story. Well, to fight this tragic case of loseritis, he made up an imaginary friend named Angel. This was fitting because Angel was his middle name. I mean, he could have got a little more creative. You can literally name this thing whatever you want, but I'll let it slide. Well, him and Angel would play and our narrative redditor would have a great time. That's until he started to make friends. Once he took a step out of Loserville and people started to hang out with him, Angel would get angry. He would start to cause trouble, break things, and hurt people. Sword Rallier would have to make up excuses to explain Angel's behavior. So what do you think about this? Do you think this was a demon following this poor kid around, or do you think he manifested an entity to explain his own bad behavior? Does Angel the demon not exist, and it's all just in this redditor's head as he attacks the people around him? At number 9 we have Betsy. This story starts off when the writer of this post was only 5 years old. Her mom walked out on her sister, and her dad. It was now her dad's job to watch them both, but because of his wife leaving him, he started to turn to booze. After some time they moved into a new neighborhood where the writer knew no one and quickly made friends with a young girl named Betsy. The two would play almost every day. Betsy would show her around town, and once they grew close she went over to spend the night at Betsy's house. But eventually Betsy moved away, and then the two lost contact. Now years later she's in her early 20s and she was talking to her dad and her sister about Betsy, and they both told her that Betsy wasn't real, that she was an imaginary friend, and when she would play with her she would just be talking to herself. This conversation turned into an argument And then she asked her dad, well then whose house did I stay at that night? Her dad told her that that's the reason I don't drink anymore. And that's where the story ends. This one sounds a little more like it was made up with a cliffhanger, but it could be true. Demons posing as little girls so they can brainwash you until you feel safe and then try to steal you away. At number 8 we have the Green Man. This one comes way of Redditor X Riot Starter 13X. Great name. He said when he was a kid he had an imaginary friend called the Green Man. He was a very tall guy with a doctor's mask on and he wore green scrubs. On top of this, he was covered in blood. Some kids choose flying elephants for their imaginary friends, others have some dude who just worked a 12-hour shift in the ER. This imaginary friend would freak his parents out, so they sent him to a psychiatrist who determined that this was their son's way of dealing with his sick grandparents. He had been spending a lot of time in hospitals visiting them, so they chalked this up to him just having a big imagination. But Riot Starter swears this guy was real. He would set a place for him at the table when his family would sit down to eat, and I can't imagine a better hiding place for a demon than a hospital. So many fresh souls to torment. At number 7 we have Boy in the Tree. A father and daughter are walking through the park and they come to a tree. The little girl says, "Hey dad, look, there's a little boy in the tree." And the dad looks up there, but there's no one in the tree. He asks his little girl what the boy looks like and she starts to describe him, his clothes, his shoes, his face, his hair. The dad is pretty freaked out and then the two of them leave. That night they're back at home and when everyone is asleep, the dad is woken up by a scream coming from his daughter's room. He runs in there and she is in the corner crying. He asks his daughter what's wrong and she says she told the little boy to come stay with us and now he's not the boy. He's trying to take me away. Thankfully the dad was quick to act. He had the house blessed and then there was no sign of the boy anymore. But he never forgot the scream that woke him up that night. Spooky. At number 6 we have Alfred. I grabbed this one off of Reddit and it kinda makes my skin crawl. This Redditor wrote about an old man that would visit them during the day and his name was Alfred. He would sit by her while she watched TV and her mom was making dinner. Her mom never thought anything of this because she was a very young girl, she was only about 5 at the time. But every now and again Alfred would tell her to stop watching TV and go play in the yard, to go dig in the dirt. She would tell him no because she didn't want to get dirty before dinner. So Alfred started showing up at night and in the morning trying to get the girl to play in the dirt in the backyard. She would ignore him, but after her and her mom moved out, the house got demolished for a new build. When they dug up the ground, they found 4 bodies of people who previously lived in the house. Do you think Alfred was trying to warn her or show her where he wanted her to end up? At number 5 we have The Children. This person wrote about the home she grew up in where there was so much paranormal activity she had to move out. When she was just a young girl, probably around 3 or 4, she would see small children run through the house. Not completely, but just glimpses, them running down hallways, sometimes in the backyard. This would increase more and more until she started to play with them. They would partake in games and her parents never really thought it was weird because they lived in such a secluded area. So it'd be normal for a young girl to make up some imaginary friends to play with. As she played with them more and more, they asked her to start to do dangerous things, like take knives from the kitchen and hide them in her room, or take a lighter and burn the drapes. She was young, but she knew this behavior was wrong, so she denied them. Then things started to get bad. Loud bangs could be heard throughout the house at night, and on more than one occasion the little girl woke up screaming with scratches on her body. The children would talk to her and tell her that they would hurt her family unless she listened. Throughout these paranormal activities, she told her family that it was these children, but they didn't want to believe her until her mother saw them. Late one night she looked out the kitchen window and saw what had to be a dozen children staring back at her with black pits for eyes. They moved out shortly after that. Can't blame you. At number 4 we have Hook. This next one is going to make you feel so helpless. Dominic wrote this and he said when he was a kid he would visit his grandparents quite often. If he ever went into the basement, he would see a man there who he called Hook because he was always carrying around a long curved hook. The man didn't talk, but he would smile at the boy. He told his grandparents about him, but they just laughed. They thought it was just a child's imagination. Eventually they got a little worried, so they brought a priest in to see if he could do anything. After the priest came in to visit, Hook told Dominic that his grandparents were going to go away because they were trying to get rid of him. The next week, both his grandparents died in their sleep. He never went back to the home because he was too afraid. But the house still stands and there's people living there right now. At number 3 we have Scotty. Be careful who your friends are or you can end up with a situation like this. The person writing the story said that they were in elementary school at the time and himself and his friend Ryan befriended a new friend, a very quiet, very awkward kid named Andrew. He didn't really talk to people in class. He would often talk to himself, but it seemed like he was engaged. cage like someone was there. After the writer and Ryan got to know Andrew a little bit more, they decided to have a sleepover at Andrew's house. They had fun during the day, but that night they were all sleeping in Andrew's living room. Our writer was woken up by Andrew standing over him and making a high-pitched squeaking noise. This was so loud that it woke up Ryan sleeping next to him. The two of them were frozen with fear as Andrew squeaked. The noise slowly died down until Andrew was silent, and then he said, "Scotty wants you to leave." The two boys were so freaked out that they got up to go tell Andrew's mom, but as soon as they moved, Andrew let out a booming scream. It was so loud that the boys started to tremble, and Andrew's mom came bolting down the stairs. When she came into the room, she flipped on the lights, and that's when they saw scratches all over Andrew's arms. Andrew's mom then held him down and kept repeating, "Scotty isn't real, Scotty isn't real." After Andrew calmed down, she drove both the boys home. Then they didn't talk to him for a long time, and finally when they did, he said, "Don't worry, Scotty's gone now." At number 2 we have Bad Friend. It's always nice to get a scare when you're visiting someone's home. A young man was having dinner at his professor's house with his professor's wife Susan and his son Jacob. During the dinner, Jacob kept looking into the hallway nervously. The writer of this story could tell that Jacob was frightened because of the look on his face. The professor eventually asked his son if he was seeing one of his friends in the hallway. The boy said yes, and the professor said, "A good friend or a bad friend?" And Jacob answered back, "Bad friend." So our visitor asked the young boy, "Why is he a bad friend?" To which the boy said, "Sharp hands." Yeah, that's gonna be the last time I come over for dinner. And for the number 1 spot we have Maury. A guy came to a dude's house, he found out that he was the father. Whoa, I'm just kidding. Our final story comes from Reddit, and I think it's the freakiest one we've had in the series so far. This takes place in Florida, where a girl was visiting her little cousin and her aunt and uncle. She was spending a week there. The first day everything went normal until it was time to sleep, because she had to sleep in the attic. Not super creepy because the attic had been refinished and was actually pretty nice. What was weird was how she was woken up. That night her little cousin woke her up standing right next to her bed. It was 3 AM and she was a little shocked, but she stayed up talking to him. He kept talking about a friend named Maury who lived in his room with him. This happened a couple more times, so she decided to ask her aunt and uncle about his imaginary friend. They both had never heard of him and her cousin denied it. That night she was woken up again, but this time her cousin wasn't friendly. He was very angry and he kept asking, "Why did you tell them?" Eventually he calmed down and went back to bed, but the following night she was woken up by thumping under her bed. She was terrified, but she went to see what was under there and she saw her cousin curled up in a ball, and he said, "I have to stay here so Maury doesn't hurt you. He wants to hurt you." This obviously scared the crap out of her, so she ran out of the attic and out of the house. Her aunt and uncle came out and found her outside. The creepiest part about this whole story is years later she brought it up with her aunt and uncle and cousin, and all of them denied it and said that none of it ever happened.
At number 8 we have Emily. Now this one comes from Redditor Good Day Brittany, who said when her little sister was about 6 or 7, she had an imaginary friend called Emily. Seems innocent enough. Emily lived in the sister's closet, had long dark hair, and wore a black dress, so basically she was a scary hoe. Either way, the sister played with Emily 24/7 and then started getting weird. The sister would just be sitting in the middle of her room talking to Emily and acting just bizarre. One day their brother passed her room and she turned around and hissed at him, and he swore the girl looking at him looked nothing like his sister. He ran and told their parents, and all he could hear was their little sister screaming "Get out" over and over again. Both siblings went to her room and saw her crying in their parents' arms. They actually never asked her about it until she was 24, and she admitted that Emily used to tell her to do horrible things to herself. There were times she'd wake up on the roof and have no idea how she got there. When the family moved house, the whole Emily situation ended, so honestly I have a strong feeling that Emily was the ghost of a girl that actually lived in that house. Or she was just a very messed up, very convincing imaginary friend. It's one or the other. Filling on number 7 slot is David. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said when he was young he'd play with himself a lot until his imaginary friend showed up. And I love how he's saying it like he was waiting for him to show up, like mate, just imagine him into being there. Either way, the user played with his friend all the time, and one morning he was talking to him in the kitchen and his mum asked who he was talking to. Now he replied saying, "I'm talking to David, he looks just like me and likes cuddling at night." His mum then asked where David was from, and the boy replied, "He's from your belly too. We played together in there and then he left, but now he's back." It wasn't until sophomore sophomore year that the user actually found out the truth about David. In French class in high school, they were told to choose a different name in class, and so he chose David, and so when he took his gradebook home and his mum saw the name David base product, she burst into tears. David was actually the user's stillborn twin brother, and for some reason, maybe a miracle, the user's imaginary friend was him without him even knowing it. Now at number 6 is Tony. Now this one comes from a dad who said when his son was 4 he would always ask who the girl down the hall was. Mind you, there was no girl down the hall, and this really freaked the kid's parents out. The next day they asked him what she looked like and he said flat. I have no idea what that means, but sure, she's flat, we'll take it. A few months go by and at this point the kid has started asking about the girl less and less. One day the couple were actually curious and asked their son whatever happened to that girl, to which he said she's Tony's sister. He says hi. The dad was shocked because Tony was his childhood best friend, and the dad actually saw Tony's little sister get run over by a car, and then Tony later killed himself. So his son's imaginary friend or imaginary ghost friend was this girl, and now we know why she was flat, because she was run over. And now this list is making me confused as to whether these imaginary friends are imaginary friends or are they ghosts. At number 4 are the grandparents. Now this was shared by an anonymous person who said his ex-wife's brother had a pair of twin daughters. Now the brother's parents had been dead for ages, so the little girls actually never met them. As a sort of nostalgic task, someone showed them a picture of their grandparents, and the girls replied with, "Oh, we know them, they play with us all the time." And this was already after them constantly talking to things that aren't there, or people rather that aren't there, so this is sus. Later on, the whole family, including the brother's family, went on a retreat to a lake once, and the person's wife snapped a picture of the two girls, and one of them is literally sitting down in mid-air. Like, the person showed the picture to the girl's dad, and then he asked his levitating daughter what the hell was going on. Obviously, he asked her nicer than I just said it, and she replied saying the lady said it was slippery and told me to sit on her lap so I wouldn't fall in. And honestly, you guys, I really don't know if the image is photoshopped or not. Like, I'm not versed in Photoshop enough to know, so what do you guys think? Is it photoshopped? Is it not? And I mean, this one's kind of cute, because I mean the imaginary friends are their grandparents, but then again, if they're not imaginary and they're just actually ghosts haunting their grandkids, that is bloody scary. Like, what is with that? Go into the light already. Filling our number 3 slot is Ben. Now this one comes from Redditor Omega Weapon, who said when he was about 4 years old, he used to hear voices. They'd say things like, "Is he asleep yet? No, he's just pretending," and so forth. The user would hear their footsteps and laughter, and he just assumed they were bad dreams or just evil imaginary friends. The user used to call them the bad boys in the kitchen, and fast forward 35 years, the user is now 39 and has his own 6-year-old son. One day his son told him his imaginary friend Ben told him that he used to make the dad poop his pants as a kid. The dad laughed it off, but after his son gave him a very accurate description of his old house and even mentioned the bad boys in the kitchen, the dad was no longer laughing. No one is laughing at this point. Except maybe Ben. He literally froze and felt like he was 4 again and told the son that Ben was a jealous liar and not to listen to him. But can you imagine? Like, the imaginary friends you used to have as a kid that used to terrorize you didn't just leave you in childhood, they came back to screw with your kid. Like, really? How creepy. Am I the only one? Now at number 2 is Anna. So this one comes from Lynn Gallagher's book Psychic Kids, which talks about unexplained incidents with kids, and boy, there are a lot. Now this story tackles the couple Lorenda and Ben and their 6-year-old daughter Anna. Now the family had just moved into an old Victorian era house, and a few months in, Anna started mentioning a girl called Jess. Anna said there was a dollhouse in the house that Jess didn't want her to play with, and so she listened, but then things slowly started getting worse. She would stop letting the family dog into her room because Jess was scared of it, which Lorenda found very odd. She spoke to Ben about it, who brushed it off saying imaginary friends are just part of growing up, and I mean, yeah, you're not wrong, Ben. It is part of growing up, but not like this. Months went by and Anna's complaints about Jess grew, but Lorenda was more chilled out about it. She was like, whatevs, doesn't even matter. Until one night, things went to shit. There was a storm, and so the lights went out in their house. Very horror movie-esque, I know. Either way, Lorenda went into the living room with candles because Anna was asleep on the couch. She walked in to find a little girl sitting on the floor next to Anna, singing a lullaby and stroking her hair. Now Lorenda screamed her lungs out, and their dog started barking at the girl on the carpet as well. That's when the girl realized she had been seen and ran to the door, let out the most blood-curdling scream, and then vanished. But not before leaving a pool of on the floor. And I'm like, hold up, Anna, was this an imaginary friend or was it a ghost? Like, now what are we working with here, buddy? Like, what is going on? And finally, at number 1 is January Schofield, and this one blew my mind, you guys. So by the time January was 4 years old, she had so many imaginary friends that her parents had lost count. But they weren't even the cute kind that she played dolls with, they were the bad kind that told her to hurt the family dog and her baby brother. She was so under the spell of her friends that she was adamant on hurting her baby brother, so much so that her dad would have to hold her down and she would proceed to bite him wherever she could. Now at school, she would throw herself at doors and windows, and these angry fits would only last a few minutes, but they would terrify everyone involved. No one understood what she was doing. No one understood she was a prodigy. She could speak grammatically correctly before she was 2 years old, and by the time she was 4, she had the mental age of an 11-year-old. But even then, she had no real friends. She'd only hang out with her imaginary friends, which included animals as well. She wouldn't even let her parents call her January, and at 6 years old, she actually tried to take her own life. She tried throwing herself out of a window and with her own sleeves. Realizing things were very, very wrong, her parents took her to countless psychiatrists, and it was finally found out that January didn't have any imaginary friends. She had child onset schizophrenia and was one of the youngest people to ever be diagnosed, so she was genuinely seeing and hearing people that weren't there, but in her reality, they were there. Starting us off at number 10 is Kelly. Now this one was shared by Reddit user BrownXCoat, who said when his daughter was about 3 years old, she had an imaginary friend called Kelly who conveniently lived in her closet. Kelly was a nice friend, you know, she played with the girl, she sat in her rocking chair watching over her sleep, and so forth. Either way, 2 years later, the parents are watching the Amityville Horror, the movie about the Amityville hauntings, and there's a scene where this dead girl goes all black-eyed. I haven't seen the movie per se, but the user just said this is what happened, so I'm gonna trust them. Now at that moment in the movie, their daughter comes into the room pointing to the girl saying, "Oh, that looks like Kelly." And the parents are like, "Who the hell's Kelly?" And she replied, "Oh, you know the dead girl that lives in my closet." I don't even understand how that even happened. How is the girl from Amityville in your closet if you're not even in the Amityville house? Make it make sense. Coming in at number 9 is Ruby. Back in May of 2018, actress Natalie Morales posted a photo on Twitter about kids writing and drawing about their imaginary friends. In one terrifying account, we have 3-year-old Ruby who drew a pregnant red stick figure with yellow eyes. Her description said this: "This is my imaginary mum, grateful. Her yellow eyelashes mean she can see in the dark. She only comes to see me at nighttime. It scares me sometimes, but I always want her to come back. She has 2 babies in her belly. She's 14 but can never have a birthday." Like, Ruby, sweetie, something isn't right, isn't it? That's too specific of a description for a 3-year-old. I feel like this is the ghost of a 14-year-old girl who maybe got like raped, then pregnant, and then I don't know. That is the worst case scenario, but my mind has to go there, doesn't it? When it comes to ghosts, I just think they've had a really bad death, and really they could have gone peacefully. At number 8 we have Mary. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said their 2-year-old daughter had an imaginary friend who she played with quite a bit. The parents would watch her from the baby monitor and find it cute how she kept herself entertained with things like that. A few months of this went on until one Saturday morning. The parents overheard their daughter saying, "What? Okay, I'll tell her." And then the daughter walked over to the parents' room and told the mum, "Mary says you're doing a good job." And Mary was the name of the kid's grandma who she was really close to before she had died. So this imaginary friend was really just the ghost of her grandmother. I mean, it could be worse. Could be Zozo the demon. We don't like that, do we? We like Mary the grandma. Filling out on 7th slot is Emily, shared by Redditor Good Day Brittany. She said when her sister was about 6, she had an imaginary friend called Emily. Emily lived in the sister's closet, had long dark hair, and wore a black dress, so she was either Wednesday Addams or a demon. There's no in between. Either way, the sister played with Emily 24/7, and then things started getting really weird. The sister would just be sitting in the middle of her room talking to Emily and acting very strange and bizarre. One day their brother passed her room and she turned around and hissed at him, and he swore the girl that was looking at him looked nothing like his sister. He went to tell their parents, and all he could hear was his sister screaming "get out" over and over again in a very deep voice. And last time I checked, 6-year-olds do not have deep voices, so Riddle me that. Either way, after that, the siblings never asked her about it again until she was 24, and she admitted that Emily used to tell her to do horrible things to herself, and there were even times she'd wake up on the roof and have no idea how she got there, but she was just too scared to say anything. When the family moved house, Emily sort of just disappeared, and honestly I have a very strong feeling that Emily was the ghost of a girl that actually lived in that house. But I'm no expert. I feel like I should be though by now. By now. Put some respect on my name. At number 4 is Jonathan. Now 3-year-old Rebecca was super stoked to tell her parents about her new friend Jonathan. The parents thought it was cute and all and left it to her own devices. Rookie mistake, people, you never do that. Months went by and Rebecca started getting weirdly obsessed with the closet in her room and eventually told her parents that Jonathan was in there. Again, they ignored her because let's face it, she's 3 and is probably just talking a bunch of baby shit. Let's be real. Now a few more months go by and Rebecca's mum becomes pregnant, so the family move into a bigger house to accommodate the growing family. With the new house, Rebecca completely forgot about Jonathan until 4 months later when a new family moved into their old house. They ended up contacting Becca's dad, saying they had found a trap door in the back of Rebecca's closet and under it was a hole. And inside that hole was a box that had Jonathan written on it, and inside of that was a bunch of baby's clothes and pictures. Now, I'm no ghost expert, but you definitely have a haunting on your hands, my friend. This is definitely a haunting. And I have a lot of expertise to back me up. I am professional. Although I look like Blossom from the Powerpuff Girls right now, but I am a professional, I assure you. Filling at number 3 slot is Anna. This one's from Lynn Gallagher's book Psychic Kids, which discusses unexplained incidents with kids. This particular story tackles couple Lorenda and Ben and their 6-year-old daughter Anna. The trio had just moved into an old Victorian era house, and a few months in, Anna starts mentioning a girl called Jess. Anna said there was a dollhouse in the house that Jess didn't want her to play with, and so she listened. But then it got worse and it almost seemed like Jess started controlling Anna. She would stop letting the family dog into her room because Jess was scared of it, which Lorenda found really odd. She spoke to Ben, who brushed it off, saying imaginary friends are part of growing up, and I mean fair Ben, you're not wrong. You ain't wrong, Ben. Months went by with the incidents getting worse and worse until one fateful night. There was a storm and the lights had gone out in the house. Lorenda went into the living room with candles because Anna was asleep on the couch, but when she walked in she saw a little girl sitting on the floor next to Anna, singing a lullaby and stroking her hair. In the flesh, a little girl. No imagination. Lorenda obviously screamed and their dog started barking at the girl on the floor. That's when the girl realized she'd been seen and ran to the door, let out the most blood-curdling scream, and then vanished. All that was left from her was a pool of blood. And I'm like, Anna, Jess is not your friend, she's a ghost. I really hope they moved house. I really hope so. Now at number 2 is Tracy. This one was shared by Redditor Chillcello, who said when her niece was 4 years old, she had an imaginary friend. The niece would watch Scooby-Doo with the friend, do naughty things, and blame it on the imaginary friend, and so forth. So the user decided to ask more about this friend, and the niece said that she was a girl and that she was also dead. The user took that on the chin and asked if the friend had a job, to which the niece said yes, she does what my daddy does, aka the friend was a cop since her dad was a cop. Continuing on, she asked where the imaginary friend worked, and she said right next to where my daddy is a policeman. I met her when I was in mummy's belly, she touched it when I was inside. Hold up, little girl. Backtrack there, what was that? Apparently, a few months before the niece was born, the user's cousin Tracy had been hit by a train and killed. She was a cop, she loved Scooby-Doo, and worked in their dad's police station. So this imaginary friend just turned out to be the user's dead cousin, Tracy. There's a lot of dead family members coming back. I see a trend, do you?
Starting off this countdown, we have the 2 men. Mother of 6, Katie Jones, got really creeped out when her young daughter would talk about people that she couldn't see. Since the age of 2, apparently her daughter Alice would talk about the people in her house. One time she started to cry. When asked what was wrong, she said, "There's 2 men in my room staring and shouting at me. I don't like it." So this poor girl was being haunted by 2 older men. Not only that, but there was a girl named Sheila that would apparently sit at the bottom of her bed and just cry for her mom. Well, upon doing research, Katie found that a girl named Sheila was house. Now, here's where it gets a little more lighthearted. After being haunted for months by these ghosts, Alice said that her grandmother came and told them to go away, and they did. So, isn't that kind of sweet? Like her grandmother is still watching over her. In our 9th spot, we have the Midnight Girl. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. According to mother of 3 Tracy, when her daughter was 4 years old, she would tell her about her little friend that wanted to play games with her. The only thing is, she constantly wanted to play and wouldn't leave her daughter alone. She especially wanted to play these games at midnight, which is really creepy. But anyways, Tracy actually resolved this issue by leaving the ghost some toys to play with in the closet upstairs. And it worked! In the morning, the toys would be completely moved around. At least we know that this ghost is on the friendlier side, because at first I was getting scared about the games that she wanted the girl to play with her, especially at midnight. Moving on to number 8, we have the Green Man. This kid's imaginary friend is probably the creepiest one on this list. Why? Well, according to him, his friend was a tall male doctor that would be dressed in bloody scrubs and would wear a medical mask. If I saw that as a child, it would have severely messed me up. But anyways, he called this guy the Green Man because the green scrubs he was wearing. Now of course, his parents didn't believe him, so he was sent to a psychiatrist to try to talk about his problems. The psychiatrist said that the man was just a figment of his imagination, created to help him cope with the loss of his grandparents and the amount of time that he spent in the hospital with them. But to this day, he knows that the Green Man wasn't made up. He remembers him vividly standing behind him a lot and having his hand constantly on his shoulder, which is super creepy. Coming in at number 7, we have the Easter Bunny. This next individual had the Easter Bunny as their imaginary friend. But this Easter Bunny wouldn't give out chocolate or candy, no. In fact, it was just a man in an Easter Bunny costume, and it would scare him and his twin brother. One day he was sitting on the couch with his cousin when his twins started yelling, "He's in here, he's in here," referring to the creepy ghost bunny man that was haunting them. They were constantly being frightened by this man that would show itself at random times of the day and night. I'm just wondering who this dude is. Like, did he pass away while en route to a kid's Easter party? Or like, do you have wardrobe options in the afterlife and he decided to wear a bunny costume? In our 6th spot, we have the girl down the hall. When this boy was 4 years old, he used to always ask his mom who the girl was down the hall. If my kid ever said anything like that, I'd pack my bags and leave ASAP. And honestly, his mom was very frightened about it, because obviously they couldn't see anyone standing in the hallway. One day she finally decided to ask more about this girl. Well, her son described the girl as being flat. He then said, "She's Tony's sister." Well, the mom's best friend when she was little was a boy named Tony. Tony's sister got run over by a car, hence why this girl appeared to be flat. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the babysitter. Honestly, there are way too many creepy stories involving kids and babysitters, so I'm just happy I never had to be one. Well, according to this individual, the kids she used to babysit had multiple imaginary friends. All of them were dead. One was an old lady and one had no head, with his insides sticking out of his neck. He described both of them as being covered in blood. Excuse me? How do kids see this stuff and like not get terrified by it? Like, this kid was being haunted by someone with no head that was oozing blood, and he would like talk about it no problem, as if it's just a normal thing for people to be seeing. And at number 4, we have the friend named Robert. This next individual had an imaginary friend named Robert. Robert apparently haunted him for years. Now, it's believed that Robert passed away in a fire. They figured this out because whenever they would turn on their fireplace, he would get mad. The kid would then freak out and demand that they turn it off because Robert doesn't like fire. He would say things like, "Robert says fire burns." I mean, I feel bad for Robert. You can tell he's not trying to be scary, just don't have matches, lighters, or fireplaces in your house and he'll let you live in peace. Moving on to number 3, we have the woman in white. Okay, I lied. This one is probably the creepiest imaginary friend someone has ever had. So when this next individual was 3 or 4 years old, he was haunted by a woman with black hair, pale skin, super red lips, and green eyes. According to him, she would be dressed in all white and would appear on the ceiling of his room or sitting above his curtains. But the scariest place he saw her was on the hood of his car while his family was driving. Imagine that, like the car's driving and just this woman is just sitting there staring at you, no one else can see them. So she would always appear at the most random times in the most random places, and it would terrify him every time he saw her. One time his mother told him to ask her what this woman wanted. Her response was, "I'm just watching." Yeah. No thank you. In our second spot, we have the possession. LaToya Ammons had to deal with something no mom would ever think they would have to deal with. All 3 of her kids got possessed. But for a while, no one believed her until they saw the kids themselves. So it started off with a lot of black flies being around the house that they just started renting. From there, the family would see shadowy figures lurking around. One night, one of her daughters screamed for her mom. When she came in, she saw one of her daughters levitating above her bed. 3 days later, all 3 of her kids became possessed by the imaginary friend that they saw. Their eyes would be bulged and they spoke in deep voices, you know, the typical possessed stuff. At one point, one of the kids literally walked up the wall, literally just like in The Exorcist. Finally, a priest came to the rescue and was able to cast out all the evil inside of them. And in our number 1 spot, we have the dead friends. Back in 2018, a woman named Rebecca Evans was interviewed by a bunch of reporters because she claimed her 3-year-old daughter, Rosalind, could see dead people. One day, Rosalind told her mom that she's got new best friends. She said one of her friends' name was Tilly and the other's name was Alex. She then said that both of them live in the house with them and that they are both dead. Imagine how creeped out her mom must have felt when she heard that. But that's not all. She also said that Alex's mom and granddad both died in the house as well. So you got not one ghost that's haunting your child, you got 4. In an article, Rosalind's mom, Rebecca, said that she never talked to Rosalind about death or the afterlife. So hearing this from her was quite shocking. So eventually, she did do some digging, and the house they live in dates back to the 1500s. In 1861, there was a 10-year-old boy named Alexander Turner that lived there. And in 1891, there was a 20-year-old woman named Matilda Oak that lived there. So there you go, that's her imaginary friends, Alex and Tilly.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Purple Mommy. Starting off strong. This was a story that was posted to Reddit by the user Professor_Dog, and they wrote, quote, Purple Mommy. When my son was first learning to talk, he would tell us about something called Purple Mommy. It could be an imaginary friend, but these details are a little bit creepy. Purple Mommy is all purple with long hair and bright white eyes. At the time, he mixed up purple with black, so he could have meant that she was all black. Purple Mommy picks him up at night and turns off the lights. We would often find my son out of his crib in the morning, which would mean him crawling over the railing into the ground at a time when he was barely walking. Definitely found the lights off in his room a few times too, even though he is terrified of the dark. Purple Mommy needs a bandage because she has blood everywhere. Purple Mommy has no smile, meaning that she has no mouth. Purple Mommy can take her head off. Purple Mommy really doesn't like Daddy. He told us all of this stuff for maybe a year or a little more. If we ever asked where she was, he'd always point to the same spot, a corner of the room behind his open closet door. He would also wake up crying almost every night during this time. Once, during a really rough night, my wife went to ask him what's wrong, and his answer was, Purple Mommy won't let me sleep. I'm not gonna lie, Purple Mommy sounds absolutely terrifying. In our number 9 spot today, we have Kelly. This story starts off when someone, who we'll call Marissa, realized that their daughter had an imaginary friend named Kelly. Kelly apparently lived in Marissa's daughter's closet, which sounds kind of creepy, but I guess even imaginary friends need a home, so who am I to judge? Kelly liked to sit in the rocking chair while the daughter did pretty much anything. Sleeping, playing, you know it. Kelly was in the rocking chair. This friendship went on for quite a while, but it eventually faded away, as most imaginary friendships do. Flash forward 2 years later, and Marissa is watching the new Amityville horror movie with her husband. Marissa's daughter walks into the living room at the exact moment in the movie where the dead girl has completely black eyes, and instead of being absolutely terrified, the daughter looks at the screen and says, "Hey, that's Kelly!" Marissa at this point had totally forgotten about the imaginary friend and said, "Kelly who?" And the daughter replied, "The dead girl that lived in my closet." Maybe Kelly wasn't as imaginary as we all once thought. In our number 8 spot today, we have Paris Jaris. Reddit user Biggest Parrot told the internet a story about an imaginary friend her sister had called Paris Jaris. They wrote, quote, "My dad had built her a small playhouse in our backyard where my mom could see her and hear her while she was in the kitchen. My sister would have tea parties and such with her imaginary friend. One day mom heard her say, "Don't worry, as long as I'm alive, they won't hurt you." She paused and said, "Well, if you do that, then I can't help you. It's not nice to kill people." When my mom asked her what that was about, my sister said, "Sometimes I have to tell Paris to be a nice person or he can't visit anymore." I have to ask, what do you even say to that? I mean, I'm glad she knows that Paris Jaris is wrong for that, but I would be absolutely terrified of whatever the hell was going on there. The Reddit user finishes the post by saying, "We moved not long afterwards and she didn't get a new playhouse." Yeah, can't say I blame anyone for that. Hopefully Paris Jaris stayed behind in that house. In our number 7 spot today we have Arlo. One day a couple's young daughter started talking about her new friend Arlo. Arlo was apparently quite funny, and the daughter would often tell her parents stories of the things that they would do together. The parents assumed Arlo was a friend from school for a while, but then it came to their attention that there was no Arlo at the girls' school. Okay, so who is Arlo and where did they come from? Flash forward to when the weather started getting warmer and the ice cream man started coming around the neighborhood. The daughter was asking about who this man was and why he was playing music, and the parents just didn't want her to start asking for ice cream 10 times a day, so they told a little white lie. They told her that he was the music man and that he just comes by to play music for everyone. During this time, the pandemic was in full effect, so the family was in lockdown and they weren't seeing anyone else or any other friends. A few weeks go by, and then one day, as the ice cream man comes to the neighborhood, the daughter hears the music, and that's when she looks at her parents and says, "Oh, it's the ice cream man. I know he sells ice cream and that he's not the music man." Apparently, Arlo told her that her parents had lied when they told her that he was the music man. This is when her parents asked her, "Where does Arlo live?" And the daughter replied, "In my closet." In our number 6 spot today we have Jacob. Reddit user Lil Pig Perez shared a story that involved her niece and her imaginary friend during a trip for ice cream. A lot of ice cream references. She wrote, quote, "As I started driving, my niece asks if Jacob, imaginary friend, could get an ice cream too. I jokingly said, Jacob can get his own ice cream. I laughed and said, just kidding, we'll get Jacob an ice cream. She didn't respond, so I looked in the rear view mirror. I couldn't see very much because it was kind of dark, but what I could see was my niece's face. She looked angry and I was about to reassure her that I was kidding, but I realized that she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at something near my ear, towards the back of my head. Then she said, I said no, Jacob, be nice. No, she didn't mean it. Either that is one terrifying demon of a friend, or this niece has quite an active imagination and a strong desire for extra ice cream. In our number 5 spot today we have Mr. No Face. This story comes from Reddit and was posted by the user Legacy of Potato about their daughter Emma's new friend. When the announcement of this new friend came, Emma explained to her mom that her new friend, who Emma's mom immediately knew was imaginary, was called Mr. No Face. Okay. It's a bit creepy, but not a reason to freak out. Emma's mom asked a few questions about Mr. No Face, which Emma answered, but then she began to get nervous and quickly shuffled off to her room. Her mom called her back, but Emma just didn't listen, which was extremely unlike her. The next day, Emma's school called and said that the mom needed to set up a meeting to come and talk about Emma. When Emma's mom asked Emma why her school would be calling, Emma insisted that they were making up lies about her, and that she was especially upset that they had apparently told her that Mr. No Face wasn't real. The next day, Emma's mom went to the school to speak with the teacher, and the teacher explained that Emma was exhibiting some strange and disturbing behavior and asked if she had been watching any horror films lately. Emma's mom began to get defensive and asked for more explanations as to what the teacher could possibly be talking about. The teacher said that Emma had been talking to someone named Mr. No Face. Okay, it's an imaginary friend. Kids have those. What could possibly be so bad? The teacher then went on to explain that Emma had been acting out and that she had been drawing some really gory pictures and telling the other students that Mr. No Face wants their blood. The mother couldn't believe what she was hearing and she raced home to ask Emma about these accusations. When she arrived home, her mother, Emma's grandmother who had been looking after Emma, looked pale white like she had just seen a ghost. Emma's mom ran to the kitchen and it was there that she saw Emma. Emma turned around to face her and her neck was cracking. Once she turned around, Emma's mom saw that her eyes were now pitch black. Emma spoke in a low, guttural voice and said, "He wants blood. Yours will be shed." The mother screamed, "Give me my daughter back," and Emma replied, "She's mine." The Redditor ends off the post by saying, if your child has an imaginary friend with no face, run. In our number 4 spot today we have Spider Hands. Posted by the user Not Another Whatever, they wrote, "My sister Ashley used to get visited at night by a dead girl with long dark hair and spider hands. Yes, this predated The Ring. Yes, I'm old AF. She moved out the second she turned 18, never looked back. 20-odd years later, our half-brother Trevor moved into her old room. It wasn't long after Trev started sleeping on the sofa or with the lights on and told us about his new friend that he didn't like. She was a dead girl who had long dark hair, an old nightgown, and spider hands. Needless to say, none of us offered to trade rooms with him. I guess this is less of an imaginary friend story because it seems like no one wanted to be friends with the girl. And honestly, I'm not sure that I could possibly blame them. In our number 3 spot today we have Dawn. Science Nerd 86 posted this story about his daughter and how one day she randomly started talking about a man named Dawn. They wrote, "She always described him in the same way and didn't seem scared at all despite bringing him up every day. She didn't go to daycare and we didn't know anyone named Dawn. Then one day, she got completely freaked out, wouldn't walk around the house alone in case she ran into Dawn, wouldn't sleep in her own room, and would talk about how she hated him because he said mean words to her all the time. About a year after Mean Dawn, we bought a new house. Once we moved, she never spoke of him again. Honestly, while all of that was happening, it would obviously be very concerning and frightening, but perhaps not as frightening as when you realized that she had stopped seeing him after the move. Like a sense of relief, but also a sense of, what the hell just happened? It's almost like a demon confirmation, you know? In our number 2 spot today we have the Bunny Man. This story starts off when our storyteller was looking after some twins. The twins constantly spoke of a man who was in a Easter bunny costume, and they were both absolutely terrified of him. Of course, all the adults really just brushed this off, assuming it was some imaginary person that the boys made up together. One day, while the babysitter was looking after the boys, one of the boys was in the shower while the other one and the babysitter were downstairs watching TV. The one twin watching TV said, "You need to go check on Matt," referring to the twin in the shower. And at the same time, Matt, the one in the shower, began shrieking, "He's in here, he's in here." The babysitter booked it upstairs and had to check every single room before Matt would calm down. Who is this Bunny Man and how are both twins seeing him? And how did the one twin know he was around just seconds before the other one started yelling? All I know is that I feel extremely bad for Matt because a creepy stranger dressed in a bunny costume who appears in the bathroom while you're showering is enough to scare absolutely anyone. In our number 1 spot today we have the Hat Man. This story reads, "When my son was about 3 years old, we were living with my mom in an older apartment. I had always gotten a weird vibe from it. The atmosphere felt heavy and a little oppressive, but I assumed it was just because of the age. However, my son started waking up in the middle of the night and would talk to his friend, who he described as the Hat Man. He would also wake up and tell Hat Man that he didn't want to go play with him because he was supposed to be asleep and that he'd see him tomorrow. This was always followed by him waking me up and asking for a glass of water. I knew it wasn't just an imaginary friend when one night I heard him talking, and when he said he'd see him tomorrow, the door to his room closed on its own. This stopped completely once we moved out. The door closing literally just gives me chills, full-on poltergeist vibes. Moving was definitely a good choice, and I'm glad that the Hat Man stayed behind."
Starting off this countdown, we have the ghost named Jason. Between 1908 to 1911, the New York State Education Building was constructed. But apparently, it's haunted by a ghost named Jason, a man who died while constructing this building. So according to the story, Jason was working in the basement when he accidentally fell into a spot where concrete was being poured. Instead of his fellow workers helping him, his supervisor instructed them to keep pouring. His body was trapped in the cement, and his ghost still haunts the building. Workers of the building on a number of times have been pushed by a cold hand in the basement area, where Jason passed away. Others have felt like they were being choked by a cold hand. Needless to say, Jason is not happy about his death and makes sure all the workers know that. In our 9th spot, we have the haunted Gravesite. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Please do it for me. Thank you. For the story, let's make our way over to Tokyo. So back in 940 AD, there was a man named Tera no Masakado. He was a very wealthy samurai, but on March 25th, he was beheaded. Now he haunts his gravesite and anyone that disturbs him. So first off, when he was decapitated, apparently his head resisted decay for 3 months. In fact, his eyes would just roll around in their socket. So there's that creepy fact. But then in 1923, after Tokyo was struck by the Kanto earthquake, the government moved his monument. And he was not happy at all about that. To make things worse, the Minister of Finance started to build a new building in that spot. But within days, he was hospitalized by a strange illness. He died after 3 months in the hospital. Not only that, 14 people from the construction company also died. It's thought that they were all visited and cursed by Masakato, and all because they disturbed his burial spot. In our 8th spot, we have the Ouija board. I have told you 1,000 times, never mess with a Ouija board. And here's another story to show you just how dangerous they are. Alright, so this story was posted on Reddit by the user Celluloid Addiction. The story takes place in October of 2004 when he was in high school. Since it was close to Halloween, his friends and him decided to mess around with a Ouija board. They were using it outside and nothing spooky was really happening. They were just making jokes the whole time and doing the whole like, I swear I'm not moving it, but they actually were. So they were just fooling around. After they had enough of that, they headed home for the night. That night though, one of the friends was greeted by a ghost. He was having trouble sleeping when all of a sudden he felt this heaviness surround him and his vision went blurry. That's when he saw a bloody, charred face with bright red eyes grinning at him through the window. That same night, the Reddit user had a near-death experience. He was driving home when he got into a car accident. His entire car was smashed. So like I said, don't play with Ouija boards. Moving on to number 7, we have Robert the doll. Honestly, this one shouldn't surprise you. This doll is locked up for a reason. Those that disturb him most likely will suffer his wrath. The doll was given to a boy named Robert Eugene Otto in 1906. Shortly after he got Robert, bad things would happen around their house, like furniture and glasses would break. Eventually, the family moved to France, leaving Robert in a box in the attic, nailed shut. Years later, his owner returned home and found Robert still there. In 1974, he was found dead in the attic. Robert was on top of him, his hands around his neck. Now, it's believed that Robert is possessed by some evil entity. It's now in Key West in the Fort East Martello Museum. A big sign guards the box saying, "Do not photograph the doll." Basically, if you do take a picture of him without asking for permission, he'll make you suffer. He is believed to have caused car accidents, broken bones, injuries, and illnesses. So it's just best if we all stay as far away from him as possible. In our 6th spot, we have the sleep paralysis demon. Sleep paralysis is so terrifying. It's only happened to me once, and I hope it never happens again. Well, in this story, a man named John had a very creepy encounter during sleep paralysis. So he woke up in the middle of the night not being able to move his body at all. He felt like something was sitting on his chest. He tried to scream, but nothing came out of his mouth. Then all of a sudden, he felt like he was being choked. It felt as if someone was grabbing his throat. As this was happening, he glanced over to his door and he saw a dark figure standing there. The dark figure had his hand raised, like the Darth Vader grip thing. Thankfully, his roommate heard him gasping for air and ran into the room. In the morning, he found that his neck was covered in bruises. In particular, it looked like a handprint. So he's convinced that he was genuinely choked out by a real demon. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the devil. This next man met the devil himself, or so he believes he did. So this story takes place in 1942 Mexico. The man was 20 years old at the time. During one summer, the man and his family went to go check out the circus. At one point, he ran into a stranger that claimed he was the greatest illusionist in the world. He said he had a trick that would terrify him. He said he originally auditioned to be part of the circus, but the owner had rejected him, claiming him to be the devil. At this point, the man was intrigued, so he asked to see the trick. That's when he held up his right hand and put a white glove on it. The stranger started chanting some strange words in another language. Then he grabbed the tip of the white glove and whipped it off. His skin had been removed from his right hand completely. All there was left was bone. But that's not all. The stranger then grabbed a wooden plank with long nails pointing up. He jumped off some steps and landed right on top of the nails. The nails went right through his foot and blood started pouring out. That's when the man knew something wasn't right. This man was some sort of evil demon, or literally the devil himself. In our 4th spot, we have the boy in the red parka. This story was actually featured on the show Paranormal Survivor, and fun fact, I am in that episode, so go check it out. See me act. Anyways, basically several years ago, the Houston family moved into a new home. However, as soon as they did, paranormal things began to happen. One night, Nancy Houston woke up in the middle of the night and saw a strange entity staring at her from her closet. That's not all. The mother would often see figures in the backyard, and Chris Houston was haunted by a young boy in a red parka. One time, while trying to fight off this demon boy, it left him with a giant scratch mark up his arm. Eventually, the haunting got so bad that the three of them had to pack up and move out of their house. In our third spot, we have the deep sleep. So this next individual used to live on the top floor of a house with her family. Only thing is, the floor was haunted by ghosts. At night, they would hear ghostly whispers and footsteps. They would wake up and find their furniture had been moved. Well, one night she went to bed and woke up to the sound of someone pacing back and forth at the end of her bed. She threw the covers over her head and tried to go to sleep. The next morning, though, her mom couldn't wake her up. She sat down beside her and tried to lift her up and shake her awake, but she was unresponsive. She didn't wake up for hours. When the family finally decided to call an ambulance, she woke right up. She said that it was the ghosts doing. After that incident, the family moved out immediately. Coming in at number 2, we have the mirror. So this next individual moved into a house that had a very pretty but creepy antique mirror. At night, she swore she could hear whispering coming from the mirror. One night, she got out of bed to investigate. She walked down the hall and right up to the mirror. It was pitch black and she was planning to put a sheet over it. But before she could do just that, she saw something odd in the mirror reflection. She saw herself standing, but she also saw a tall, thin man standing directly behind her. She turned around, but no one was there. She decided that she was just tired and that her mind was probably playing tricks on her. But as she went to leave to go back to bed, she felt something grab her from behind and throw her into the mirror. She heard the mirror crack behind her and she got shards of glass in her hand. She ran back to her room and didn't come out till the morning. In the morning, she decided she was going to get rid of the mirror. When she went up to the mirror, she saw that it was no longer cracked. Yet she knew for a fact that it had cracked because she got shards of glass in her hand from it. Needless to say, she got rid of that mirror ASAP. Honestly, who here has seen the movie Oculus? Because that is some horror movie stuff right there.